So, when my kids were only toddlers, which I was just mentioning in a conversation, one of the things we did as a family was play board games. So imagine that, right? Board games with toddlers. And I remember this being a little challenging because it was so boring. That wasn't in the notes. I didn't want that to be there, but it just had to come up. Because the games, of course, were just a bit simple, right? You roll a dice, you see how many steps you go, and the first one to the end wins. And as you're playing, you're just asking yourself, when is this going to end? But it's good for the children. Recently, we've been playing Monopoly, which has been more fun. Because in Monopoly, you have to think a little bit more, right? With the money that I have, which properties am I going to buy? You have to be careful about buying too many properties and about buying all the expensive properties like Boardwalk and Pennsylvania, because in the end, you might have no money left to build houses. You've got all these properties, but you can't build anything on the expensive lane, Boardwalk and Park Place and so forth. And so we teach our boys, you need to prioritize the development of some properties and not others. The orange properties, the red properties, these are great places to build and they give you good bang for your buck. And it's not just in Monopoly that priorities are important, is it? They are important in absolutely every area of life. Even our own bodies. When I was in high school, I had this trumpet solo in grade 11. Glenn Miller's In the Mood. Maybe next week I'll do it for you. And the same thing will happen in high school. You see, at home, when I practiced this solo, it was angelic. It was heavenly. I hit all the notes and it was amazing. But on the day of the concert, as we were coming up to the solo, my mouth completely dried up. And no sound came out when it was supposed to. And I had no idea why that happened. And many years later, like last year, I learned that when you get nervous, like when a lion walks into the room, your body takes water away from places like your mouth and prioritizes other parts of your body that need it. Because it is not a time to be eating a meal, it's a time to go into fight or flight. On an airplane, you're supposed to prioritize your own oxygen masks before you help the person beside you. At work, you distinguish between urgent matters and non-urgent. And at home, you can't buy everything, and so you've got to prioritize what you're going to spend your budget on. And even in the Bible, okay, in Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 to 6, Jesus says to his 12 disciples, "Do not go among the Gentiles or enter any town of the Samaritans. Go rather to the lost sheep of Israel." You see, God's plan was to save the whole world through one man, Abraham, and through one nation, Israel. And so when Jesus came, he focused not on the whole world all at once, all at first, but on Israel. Not forever on Israel, but first on Israel, so that through Israel and through his disciples, he would then reach the whole world. You see, what priorities do is that they give you focus, right? Focus on the red properties, all right? Just focus on staying alive right now. Priorities, they're about strategy. And they determine what you say yes to and what you say no to, even if saying no might be a little difficult. Last November, a lifetime ago, our leadership team had a retreat on a Saturday because we saw that there was a lot we could be doing as a church, and we just simply needed to prioritize some of the things we would do. And so today, what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of what we talked about at the leadership retreat. But first, a quick recap of the last 2 weeks. What is the mission of the church? The mission of the church is, again, Matthew 28, verses 18 to 20. Go and make disciples of all nations. And we saw that this is part of God's plan to dwell with humanity in all the earth. You see, when you become a disciple, God's Spirit dwells in you. And when there are disciples in all the earth, God dwells in all the earth. And the church's job is to make disciples and therefore cultivate God's presence on earth. God's presence in you and in those around you. And according to Revelation, the end result of this mission is paradise. A community where we get along with God and with others. Where we're made right with God and others. Enjoying God and others. And a community where all things are made right. A community that works for us. Because that is what God wants for us. But to make disciples, it helps to have people coming to church, coming through the doors, listening to the Word of God being preached, listening to the gospel, meeting other Christians like yourselves, and learning how to live like Jesus in this very community. Yet in North America, people are leaving the church at a rapid rate. I read in a book recently that millennials are far less religious than boomers were at the same age. Churches are closing down their doors. And our mission as a church is simply to go against that trend. So instead of leaving our church, the question is, how do we get people to come to church? How do we get people to stay at church and have an opportunity to meet God and to grow deep in their faith? Or in other words, why do people come to church at all? On the next slide, in 2016, the Pew Research Center did a study in the United States called Choosing a New Church or House of Worship. And according to the study, these are the top reasons why Americans go to church, which is probably not too different for Canadians, okay? Just these stats, we don't have them in Canada as much, so we're always relying on what our neighbors in the south are doing. And according to this research survey, for 83% of those surveyed, the quality of sermons played an important role. No pressure. That's right. Yeah, I know, right? Oh my gosh. That was in the back of my mind, but I was just hoping we just slip by that first stat, without thinking about it. Is my mouth drying up? I do bring my water bottle every Sunday. Yeah, I gave my telltale sign, right? As you're playing poker with me, like, his mouth is drying up, he's blushing, or bluffing, that's the word, right? Yeah, so quality of sermons, let's just slip by that one. But 79% said it was important to feel welcomed by the leaders. Okay, a little bit more pressure, I guess. 74% said that the style of services was important. 70% said that the location was important. And then 56% said that education for kids was important. And this number increases to 65% if you are currently the parent of a minor, right? If you actually have kids, you might care a little bit more about what your kids are doing. All right, so the sermons are important. I have a friend from New York who told me that some people will go to Tim Keller's church Timothy Keller was a preacher in New York, simply to hear his sermons, okay? But as soon as they found out that someone else was preaching, they just got up and they left. Which is too bad, right? Because there's way more to church than a sermon. The pressure's being relieved. I hope. But still, the sermon is simply a draw for many people as they look for a church. That's just the reality of it. 79%, again, feeling welcomed by leaders, or, I would think just being welcomed by anyone. A pastor once told me that if a person doesn't make a friend at church soon enough, they are not coming back. Right? No one likes to just sit there alone for extended periods of time. This is not a place for me, they'll quickly say. Community, or a sense of belonging, isn't that a core reason why anyone goes to church? 74% said the style of services. And to be honest, some people don't even care about the sermons. But they absolutely are drawn to and are attracted to the music, the liturgy, or the ritual, this rhythm of life that just transports them to another world. Something that is different from the hustle and bustle of the weekly life. Okay? That's why some people are really drawn to the Anglican Church, for example. 70% said the location, and you don't want to be traveling too far for church on a Sunday. And I think that gives us a sense of who our target as a church might be, something that the transition team will say a little bit more about today. And 65% of parents with kids said education for kids was important. You see, parents, they often make decisions based on their kids. And at a previous church that I attended, I ran into a mom in the hallway, and she asked me, "Is there no program for the kids today?" She said that she came last week, her daughter liked the program, and so she's simply back to let her kid go to the program again. And I said, no, this church, they take a break in the summers, and the kids, they just join us in the main service. You can have some crayons to draw or some activities to do. And then I saw that mom take her kid into the main service. She sat for 5 minutes, and then she got up and left. She had no interest in the sermon or in the worship service. She was just simply there for her kid. And I've heard of other Christians who say that they went to a church, they didn't like the sermon at all, they didn't care about the worship service, but because their kids said they had a good time downstairs, they will keep coming back to the church. The things we do for our children, right? You just drive them to a game or a practice, and you just sit there watching them swim and waiting for an hour, and you drive all the way back. The things we do for our kids, right? Now, let me say 2 things. First, imagine if the sermon, the worship service, the fellowship, and the program for the children and youth are all done well. Wouldn't this church have a better chance of attracting and even retaining people to become disciples, to know God, and then to invest in God's kingdom? We can do all the outreach we want, but if we can't retain people, or we have a difficult time retaining people, what is the point of all that outreach? Nicky Gumbel, whom many of us know as the founder of a course that introduces people to Christianity, the Alpha Course, he said that some people connect with a church at the intellectual level. They say, that made sense to me. Whereas others connect at an emotional level. They say, that felt right to me. But either way, a person needs to somehow connect with the church to say, I want to come back and keep learning more, getting more, and connecting with God and others. So the question is, are people connecting with the message, the music, the people, and the programs? And the second thing I want you to notice about this list is that the top reasons for how people choose a church mostly happen on a Sunday morning. The sermon, the worship service, the gathering of people, the children's program. At Runnymede, Friday Night Live is hugely important, okay? And that's a group that we really want to focus on too. But our youth, they also meet on a Sunday morning right now in Breakfast Club. So how you do Sunday morning is not the only reason why people join a church. Okay? It's not the only thing that's important for a church, but it's a very important one. Okay? And to be honest, I think that our church already knows that. In the first transition report, 43% of the respondents said that midweek small groups are not that important to them. Whereas only 25% said that Sunday morning is not that important, which means more people in this congregation think that Sunday morning is a vital moment for them in their spiritual lives. And that's not just Runnymede, that is every single church out there. In every single church, more people attend Sunday mornings than they do midweek small groups. And that's because for most people, Sunday morning provides the main thing that they are looking for. It's the main opportunity where God's presence can be cultivated in a person's life. So, if our mission is to make disciples, and if Sunday morning is the main place where that might happen, where that might begin to happen, what is one possibility for how we might prioritize what we do as a church and how we develop ministry? So on the next slide, Brian Jones is a senior pastor in Philadelphia at a church called Christ Church of the Valley. And part of what he does is he coaches other senior pastors. Okay? He's one of those pastor of pastors type of people. And he has grown a church from less than 200 to over 1,000, not once, but twice in his life. Lightning has struck twice for him, I guess you could say. And his current church in Philadelphia, of more than 2,000 people, has grown, interestingly, mostly by conversion and not simply by church transfer, people coming from another church to his. But whatever, right? Those are just numbers. The key thing is, does he have anything worthwhile to say? Okay? Maybe it happened by luck. What are his ideas on church growth, and are they worthwhile? You be the judge. In one article that he wrote called The Three Buckets, he talks about how to drive growth in your church. And he says, imagine you have three buckets. The bucket on the left is called the Sunday bucket. And this represents everything you need to make Sunday worship services happen well. Okay, these are adequate facilities, preaching, worship leading, including leaders, artists, and tech, classes for children and youth, which includes teachers, assistants, registration, and so forth, greeters, hospitality, parking. And the midweek bucket is called, or the middle bucket is called the midweek bucket. So small groups that happen during the week, or kids programming and different activities. And then finally, the bucket on the right is called the missions bucket, which represents all local, national, and international outreach. And this is everything from your local soup kitchen to missionaries that you support around the world. And then finally, you have a jug of water, which represents the church's resources, which are people, money, time, and energy. And what he says, what Brian Jones sees, is that whenever he coaches senior pastors, on the next slide, churches that are stuck have typically taken their water and poured it equally in all of the three buckets. In other words, they do many things, but they do few things well. Rick Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Church, says the same thing. He says, most churches try to do too much. This is one of the most overlooked barriers to building a healthy church. We wear out people. Too often, small churches involve themselves in all kinds of activities, events, and programs. Instead of concentrating like Paul did, they dabble in 40 different things and miss being good at any of them. But really, he says, there are only a few things really worth doing in the first place. And the secret to effectiveness is to know what really counts, then do what really counts, and not worry about all the rest. So, what does Brian Jones suggest? He says that the key to creating growth is to concentrate your resources into the first Sunday bucket. Make sure that it's fully staffed, resourced, and done with excellence. And then, once you are done that, he says, let the water spill over into the midweek bucket until that's full, and then into the missions bucket. Because before you attract visitors through, let's say, a Christmas meal, you're more likely to retain a visitor on Sunday if your Sunday bucket has been filled. They're more likely to connect with what's happening here and say, I'd like to come again. Now, right off the bat, let me address some questions, okay? First, how do the transition team reports fit with this? I think they fit very well, because the first, if you recall, the first transition team report focused inward and will help us with the Sunday and midweek buckets. Whereas the second report today that you're going to hear about is focused outward and will really help us with the third bucket. A second question is, if our goal is to fill the Sunday bucket first, does that mean we're ending our midweek small groups, right? That's what the picture seemed to imply. And the answer for our church, okay, we're not just going to copy people blindly, but the answer for our church is absolutely not, okay? Friday Night Live and The Cove are such important groups, and Carl will continue to pour into them. And adult small groups will absolutely keep meeting. But, and this is just a question to consider, should improving adult small groups, which the first transition team report talked about, be a first priority for this congregation, or perhaps a second priority? Jones thinks that it should be a second priority, but what does this congregation think? Third, are we ending all missionary support? And again, the answer is no. We have a long relationship there, and there is some really great work being done by our missionaries. But, and this is again just a question, if we have limited resources, should we prioritize our Sunday bucket for the sake of our mission here in Bloor West? And as you'll see next week in the budget does take a step in this kind of direction, in something that everyone will have the ability to vote on. And finally, fourth, what would it actually look like to fill the Sunday bucket here at Runnymede? I think it would start with the pastoral staff. Another thing that is in the budget next week is to hire a children's pastor, something that this church has been thinking about for a while. It also involves reviewing staff roles. Who is doing what? Reviewing everything we do on a Sunday. Learning and exploring the possibilities for worship and children's ministry, getting ideas. And laying foundations for how we're going to build ministry, which takes time. At 401 and Islington, we saw that they were building a Costco. And they were just laying the foundations forever. It took forever to build the building. But once the foundations are set, the building goes up in no time. Doing Sunday well means, I think, coaching staff, and then the staff coaching volunteers, and recruiting new volunteers for supporting and even giving input, for supporting the new roles that might be needed. And also the whole church praying for and supporting and even giving input on how we do Sunday, until Sunday morning is done to a filled bucket level of excellence. How long will this take? Not forever, but it's different for every church because every church is different. And so this is not something that I'd like to give a strict timeline on, which would just stress everyone out. But in Brian Jones's case, and in the case of those senior pastors that he coaches, everyone moves on from the Sunday bucket. No one stays there forever, and no one wants to stay there forever. At Brian Jones's church, they're fully staffed, and they have a fully developed midweek and missions program. And even though some people objected to moving their resources to the Sunday bucket, they are now in a position where they can spend more money on outreach than most churches can even think of or imagine. And as he says, it's not about if we will ever go out and do the midweek or outreach, but a question of when. And as I've been saying the past few weeks, Sunday morning also is a form of outreach that can draw and attract parents, let's say, for the children's ministry or to the worship service, okay? So that is a suggestion for one possible way of how the church might go forward in sort of organizing some of the things, many of the things it could be doing, and a reason for why we might do it in a particular order. And there was a lot that I just sort of threw out there, and this is not necessarily the end of the discussion today. So what I would like you to do this week is think about all this. The 3 buckets principle, it's a different kind of approach. It's new, it's different, and it's change. And of course, people always respond differently to change. So this week, I would like you to think about it. As you go into your small groups, pray about it and talk about it together. Does it make sense? And what I would like to do next week is have maybe a shorter sermon and just open up the period a little bit for some Q&A, right? Are there things in here that you find make sense? Are there things that you are a little bit concerned with? And that's a point where we can just sort of talk about these things together as a congregation. And my sense is that this church will have a lot of good things to input. Okay? Even the sermon and how perhaps it might be delivered. I did get some good input from others. And so if the sermon was a bomb, I'll just blame those people. No, it's all on me. The pressure's on me, I get it. 83%, right? All right. But the details of how we figure out priorities, that's something we can have a conversation about, all right? But what's essential, I think, for us as a church is to keep in mind the mission of the church. Make disciples. Look inward and cultivate our garden, but also look outward and dream big for the glory of God. Be a light to our neighbors. And let people be attracted to us even as we eventually go out to our neighbors. And with every area in life, we've got to think about priorities. And so, is it going to be the 3 buckets? And if not, then what might it be? And this is something we could think about together. And I ask this week that you do have a moment to think about it, and next week we'll have a moment to come together about it. Okay? So with that, let me say a word of prayer. Lord God, you are a wonderful, awesome God who has done amazing things for us. You made this world to dwell with us in it. And when we messed up, you sent your Son to make us right with you. And you continued that plan to want to just be with us and dwell with us, your presence to be with us and to love us, have a relationship with us. And God, you have called us to be co-workers in your kingdom, to partner with you, to be story makers. And God, we pray that we would submit to that design, which is ultimately for our own good. And as we think together as a community about how to go forward with priorities and what to do in the ministry, God, would your spirit of wisdom be with us and guide us to the things that you want us to do, so that your name might be known in Bloor West and in all the world. And we offer all these things up to you, God.